What's up, everybody? We're back with another fantasy football video. Are you having a difficult time deciding who to drop from your roster? Say you have Trey Sermon on your bench or Ronald Jones, and you want to pick up a running back off waivers that you really like, but you don't know which running back to drop, and you don't feel comfortable giving up on somebody yet. Well, this video is going to tell you why you need to drop your kicker first and strategies to build your flex depth with the kicker being expendable. So this is a continuation video off of my kicker strategy video that I made this off season leading up to fantasy football season, where I talked about why you should draft your kicker last. So now that we're past the draft, I want to talk about strategies that you can gainfully employ for your team in order to maximize your flex depth, knowing that your kicker is expendable. If you're interested in more content like this, please check out my channel. I make a lot of fantasy football videos, but I also make other content as well, such as guitar covers, song reactions, etc. So check that out in the description below if you're interested. So for this video, I want to talk about kickers. So I see a lot of comments where people are asking who to drop from their roster. They're trying to decide, usually in their minds, they're thinking one for one. If you're dropping a running back, if you're picking up a running back, you need to drop a running back in return. Or same thing with wide receivers. It's a one for one of receivers, running backs, etc. But in this video, I'm telling you why you need to drop your kicker, because ultimately it really does not make a difference if you have your kicker at the beginning of the week or the end of the week, and why there's some strategies by leaving the kicker open that are actually can really help you. So first of all, if you go back to my kickers video, I've got the link in the description below. I talk about why kickers are essentially meaningless stats-wise. The quick rundown of it is that the difference between the number 1 kicker and the number 20 kicker over the past 3 seasons is only a grand total of 3.2 points per game. On top of that, kickers are wildly inconsistent and difficult to predict. So if you take a look at the average draft position of kickers, particularly last season, and you compare it to where the kickers actually placed, 5 out of the top 8 kickers were players that were initially undrafted from rosters. If you look at the trends of 2021, you see that it's actually very much the same thing. So in general, you saw in the drafts this year, the kickers that were going at the top were Justin Tucker and Harrison Butker. What if I told you that these guys so far this season are actually 12th and 17th in terms of their performance against other kickers in the league? So essentially, if you're drafting Justin Tucker 10th round of the draft in a 16-round draft, he's not giving you any value for that position compared to kickers that you can just get off waivers. And a good example of that is you look at the number 1 kicker in week 1, it was Joey Sly. He was the guy that we originally thought was going to be playing for the Panthers. He got cut. Now he's on the Texans. And then he had the best week 1. Week 2, it was Graham Gano, who had the number 1 week that's among kickers. And he's another guy that was wildly undrafted. And then the number 1 overall kicker so far this fantasy football season is Daniel Carlson. And Daniel Carlson was actually one of those 5 kickers in 2020 that I talked about that placed in the top 8 and still is not getting drafted for some reason. I'm not really sure exactly why. I think a lot of people forgot that he was the number 3 kicker overall in 2020. Or just not really paying attention. But he is another guy that you could have gotten mostly undrafted or in the last round that is now the best kicker in fantasy football. So in summary, it doesn't make sense to prioritize holding a kicker on your roster because, one, it's going to wildly depend on who is going to be successful week to week. A lot of these guys are guys available on waivers, so why not just wait until the end of the week? So I'm going to talk about a hypothetical example of dropping your kicker based on a start-sit decision. So again, you're putting in your waiver claims on Tuesday. So you're trying to get these hot commodities on the waivers and you're trying to figure out who to drop. So in this particular example, this guy had Christian McCaffrey, Kareem Hunt, Myles Gaskin, Tyson Williams, and he was trying to figure out if he needs to drop any of these guys to pick up Tony Pollard. So this is an example to me of where those 4 running backs that this guy has on his roster are all guys that you cannot drop. I know Tyson Williams is a relatively unproven player who's got an opportunity right now with Baltimore. Myles Gaskin and Hunt have had some questionable games time to time, but you still have to try to put yourself in a position where you maximize your running backs. And dropping one of those guys would really hurt you long term, especially if those players all have good value. And really any running backs in general, because if you have any injuries throughout the season, you want to make sure that you have running back depth to cover you in case somebody above them gets injured. Just look at Tyson Williams as an example. So if you're trying to pick up Tony Pollard, you should drop the kicker in that situation. So let's say your kicker is somebody that's relatively mediocre like Matt Gay or Ryan Suckup. Those are players that were both relatively taken somewhere in the middle that were generally drafted but ultimately have not really shown a ton of value relative to some of the other kickers like I've already mentioned before. So if you drop your kicker, now you add yourself another running back. You're missing the kicker position, but you do give yourself coverage because you are basically giving yourself an extra flex player. And then as the week goes on, you see how injuries develop. Let's say somebody gets hurt and you have the running backs now. If you got picked up that running back or kept the guy that you were thinking of dropping, it gives yourself more options as the week goes on. You really do not have to pick up the kicker until Sunday morning, to be honest. And the reason that I say this is because kickers are generally not hot commodities that people are going to pick up on waivers because they generally only need one, and they're generally content enough with theirs that they're going to not drop them. Or the other thing to consider is that if you never know which kicker is going to go off anyway, then it doesn't hurt you to make that decision at the last minute and save your flex players until the end. That way you have them all rostered, and if anything happens, you're set. But what it does for you, though, also is that it blocks these other flex players from people that you can pick up. So let's say in this example with picking up Tony Pollard, and then you also have another receiver who's kind of got some questionable status right now in Jacoby Myers. You're trying to figure out who to drop among those two. And Jacoby Myers is the one that you would drop in that situation. Personally, that's what I would do. But it doesn't, honestly, Jacoby Myers has more value than any kicker that you could pick up that week. Because let's say, for some reason, Jonnu Smith, Hunter Henry get injured, Nelson Aguilar gets injured, then Myers has a ton of value because of those injuries that occurred. So, personally, pick up the kicker later, and then that way, if anything happens where Myers goes off, you're not hurting yourself for that week because you've left him on waivers and you're blocking everybody else from getting him. It's a very good strategy. I think that more people should try to use it. I'm not really exactly sure if people have really looked into it that much, but I'm highly recommending it because ultimately having more flex depth is more important than picking up a kicker who's basically a shot in the dark anyway. Another sneaky strategy to employ with kickers as well that I want to talk about. Pick up the kicker that plays the latest available on waivers, especially if you're in a situation where you're favored for that week significantly. If you put up a ton of points on Sunday, and then let's say that the only players that you have are the opponent's got a mid-tier tight end like a Robert Tonyan, and you're playing Mason Crosby. An example from week 2. Those are the only 2 players that are playing in your week 2 matchup from the Green Bay-Detroit game. So, and let's say you're up by 40 points. There is no way that Robert Tonyan is going to give you 40 points. So, what would be a smart decision to do is drop Mason Crosby from your roster because you've already secured that week. Then pick up a running back that could give you some depth. So let's say if A.J. Dillon for some reason was available on waivers, you could still pick him up for that week because he hasn't played yet. So if you're already ahead and you already know you've locked up that week and you've got the kicker that you intentionally picked up who is playing the latest among the waiver wire options. Now it lets you get a head start on the waivers. So you can pick up a handcuffed running back that gives you some additional depth in case there's an injury. Or you could pick up another receiver as well. A good example is Quintez Cephas. If you had seen that he had gone off in that game and picked him up early, then you've now given yourself an advantage to where you can give yourself another flex player going into the waivers, and you don't have to worry about the kicker drop game because you've already done it before anybody else can pick it up because they didn't leave that spot open. So you got to play chess when everybody else is playing checkers. And this is a good way that you can do this as a fantasy football owner. It'll give you, granted, a lot of it is probably going to be fruitless at times. You're not necessarily going to get some of the value out of these end bench waiver wire options. But let's just use week 1 as an example. Let's say that you did something like this and you picked up Tyson Williams. And you didn't know that J.K. Dobbins was going to get injured, that Gus Edwards was going to get injured, that Justice Hill were going to get injured. Then you've already got yourself the number 1 running back at the price of a kicker who is probably going to be some mid-tier guy who may give you 1 week of being great, but ultimately the difference between the number 1 kicker and the number 20 kicker for the past 3 seasons is only 3.2 points per game. So I'm just using that as an example. These are some sneaky strategies that you can use if you're struggling with who to drop from your roster. My recommendation is always drop the kicker first. Give yourself some flex depth and then wait to pick up that kicker at the end. And always give yourself a position to where you can pick up maximum flex players on your roster and even drop that kicker early if you can afford it. So that's all I got for this video. If you're interested in more content like this, please let me know. Also, comment if you want your questions answered for the video coming out Saturday where I talk start-sit decisions in week 3. That's all I got. I'll see you all next time. Bye.